Good evening, I'm Bill Moyers. What's more dangerous, the big stick or the big lie? Governments have used both against their own people. Tonight I'll be talking with a man who has been thinking about how we can see the developing lie. He says that propaganda is to democracy what violence is to a dictatorship, but he hasn't lost faith in the power of common people to speak up for the truth. Join me for part 2 of a conversation with Noam Chomsky. He's one of America's most brilliant men, but in some circles he's treated as if he were a pariah, an intellectual leper whose ideas might prove dangerously contagious. Noam Chomsky is a scholar of linguistics at MIT. His breakthrough work there revised how we think about language. But it's been his criticism of power that has earned Chomsky so much disdain in establishment circles. Angry over the U.S. role in Vietnam, he started speaking out 20 years ago, and he's never let up. He's blunt and unyielding and gives no quarter to comfortable pieties. Take his newest book, Manufacturing Consent. It suggests that unlike a totalitarian regime, a democracy doesn't stoop to violence to control its citizens. It uses propaganda instead. We talked about this subject during a recent conversation in Boston. You have said that we live entangled in webs of endless deceit, that we live in a highly indoctrinated society where elementary truths are easily buried. Elementary truths such as?
Such as the fact that we invaded South Vietnam, or the fact that we're standing in the way of significant, and have for years, of significant moves towards arms negotiation, or the fact that the military system is to a substantial extent, not totally, but to a substantial extent, a mechanism by which the general population is compelled to provide a subsidy to high-technology industry. Since they're not going to do it if you ask them to, you have to deceive them into doing it. I think there are many truths like that, and I think we don't face them. We have an interesting political system in the United States. It's different from those of the other industrial democracies. This is a very free country. I mean, the individuals are, by comparative standards, the state is very restricted in its capacity to coerce and control us. There's very little they can do. Police can't come in and stop us from talking or anything remotely like that. In fact, even as compared with other industrial democracies, we're very free in this respect. On the other hand, the practical limits on those freedoms are unusually high. This is the
practical limits.
Well, there are sophisticated mechanisms that have been devised to prevent us from making use of those freedoms, and furthermore, it has been understood for a long period that in a society that's free, in a society where the state does not have the power to coerce, other mechanisms must be found to ensure that the population doesn't get in the way.
Other mechanisms being?
Indoctrination, elimination of secondary organizations, say unions, other political clubs, ways in which people, for a single isolated individual to participate in a meaningful way in the political system is almost impossible. I mean, you have to have means to inform yourself, to have ideas, to interchange those ideas with others, to turn them into possible programs, to press for those programs. Now that takes access to information, it takes independent media, it requires what sociologists call secondary organizations, means by which isolated people can group together. Active political parties, political clubs. Unions have often played this role in many countries. The United States is unusual in the extent to which all of these structures are weak. So the level of unionization is extremely low, and under the Reagan period has declined even further. Furthermore, the American unions have always been basically apolitical, or largely so. The political system is also unusual. We're the only major industrial democracy that doesn't have a political party which is basically labor-based. We only have one political party with two factions. It's the business party. We have two factions of the business party called the Democrats and the Republicans, and that's unusual. In fact, this perception is transmuted in an odd way into political terminology. So, for example, in the 1980s, each election in the 1980s, the Democrats have been accused of being the party of the special interests. And then they hotly deny it, and they say, no, they're not the party of the special interests. But who are the special interests? Well, take a look behind the rhetoric, and you find that the special interests are women, labor, youth, the elderly, ethnic minorities, the poor, farmers. In fact, it's the entire population.
The point being?
The entire population are the special interests. Now, if you look closely, there's one group that's never identified as being among the special interests. That's corporations. And that's correct. They're the national interest. And both parties are basically beholden to them. Whereas the special interests have to be marginalized, the population. So everyone denies that they represent the special interests, that is, the people. And they don't say who they do represent, but there is a group notably lacking in this list of special interests. And in fact, it's the group with anyone with his head screwed on knows has inordinate power in controlling economic decisions and setting the parameters for political life and controlling the ideological system and so on. They're not among the special interests.
Do you think it is corporations, or is it the capitalist business system whose first priority is the well-being of profit-making for the general welfare, as it is said?
Well, of course, everyone, you ask the chairman of the board, and he'll always tell you that he spends his every waking hour laboring so that people will get the best possible products at the cheapest possible price and work in the best possible conditions and so on and so forth. Now, it's an institutional fact, independently of who the chairman of the board is, that he'd better be trying to maximize profit and market share. And if he doesn't do that, he's not going to be chairman of the board anymore. If he were ever to succumb to the delusions that he expresses, he'd be out. Now, he can hold those delusions as long as he performs his institutional role. And the same is true across the board. So, for example, you can be, take, say, Walter Lippmann's specialized class, the experts. Some of them are candid enough to tell you the truth, like Henry Kissinger, who defined an expert as a person who is capable of articulating the consensus of people with power. That's what made him an expert. That's true. If you want to be an expert, part of the specialized class, you have to be able to serve the interests of objective power. That's an institutional role that has to be played. And if you do that, you can be in it. If you want to be a journalist, let's say, you have to accord to the needs of the institutions. And the institutions have very definite needs. I mean, the major media they're all corporations. They're major corporations. Like any other business, they have a product and an audience, a product and a market. The market is other businesses. They sell their product to advertisers. That's what keeps them going. And the product is audiences, and in fact, for the elite media, privileged audiences, because that improves advertising rates. So what the media are, fundamentally, as far as institutions are concerned, they're major corporations selling relatively privileged audiences to other businesses. It's not very surprising to discover that those are the interests they reflect. Furthermore, if you take a look at the managing positions, the managerial positions, the cultural managers, more or less, editors and so on, they're, first of all, very privileged themselves. They share associations and concerns with other privileged people. There's a close interaction and, in fact, a flow of people even between corporate boardrooms and government decision-making centers and media and so on. And there are many other factors, in fact, which yield the consequence that the independent media, without government coercion, there's also some of that, but even without government coercion, tend to accept and adopt as the framework for discussion the interests and concerns and the perspective of the privileged sectors of the society. That's true of the information system. It's true of the political system. The distribution of resources alone determines it. As other modes of organization and articulate expression and so on have declined, isolated individuals find themselves marginalized. And they end up by voting for a ceremonial figure if they bother to vote at all.
Are you suggesting that there's a conspiracy, that there are people who gather and decide we're going to eliminate unions, we're going to eliminate popular participation in political parties, we're going to do this, we're going to do that? Is there a conspiracy?
Well, my point is, in fact, exactly the opposite. I mean, I think, and stress again, that these are institutional facts. These are the ways the institution functions. Let's go back to the chairman of the board. There's no conspiracy in the board of managers to try to raise profits and market share. In fact, if the board of managers didn't pursue that program, they wouldn't be in business any longer. It's part of the structure of the social system and the way in which the institutions function within it, that they are going to be trying to maximize profit, market share, decision-making capacity, and so on.